In this video, I'm going to show you how to make some fluffy letters and some gross, drippy letters. Sounds fun, doesn't it? If you're new to this channel, my name is Piascik. I've been an independent illustrator for the past 12 years. I've worked with clients like Nike, Adidas, Nickelodeon, and tons more. On this channel, I talk about illustration stuff. Sometimes it's tips and tutorials. Sometimes it's reviews on some of the tools that I use. If that sounds interesting to you, maybe you should go ahead and subscribe. I don't want to ask you to hit the like button because you haven't seen anything yet. But if if you've watched multiple videos and you haven't smashed the like, just hit it a few times. It doesn't hurt it. What was I talking about again? Oh, also this channel said illustration, but also sometimes talk about ADHD because that's something that's going on in here. Okay, back on topic. So lettering has been a big part of my illustration practice since the very beginning, something that I've always been drawn to, something that I've always done. My background is in graphic design. That's what I did before illustration, so type has always been there. It's always been something that I liked. I think two of my favorite lettering styles are like gross drippy letters or like fluffy puffy letters. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to show you my process for making that kind of thing. And you'll see it's really not that hard. Hopefully you'll be inspired to try your own afterwards. All right, let's get into it. I'll meet you at the iPad. So to get started, I'll just write out the word in just simple block letters like this. If you don't want to do this, you could also just use the type tool and type it out and do the same thing. But what I'll do now is turn down the opacity, whether I write it out or you type it out. And then on top of that, I'll start to draw my letters, but I'll use these as like a structure, a little bit of a skeleton, some bones for our letters, and then our design can be the meat that will be on these letters. I should have saved the gross talk for the next part of this demo. So when I'm going to do some fluffy cloud letters, basically just making some varying size half circles around the letters that we have below. So it's like, we're building a little fluffy wall around our letters. You're just trying to sort of vary the size of the circles. At this point, I'm not being too particular because I'm going to add more variety in the tighter part of the sketch phase. This is just sort of getting a rough size and kind of placement and seeing if there's any issues that I need to deal with. So we could turn off our bones at this point and sort of look at this. And this is where I'll notice where there's some issues. So like I made the counter in the D a little too big so that this letter looks kind of skinny and doesn't match the other ones. So we can now start using this as a new starting point, and I'll just come in and fix the problem areas first. So because these are getting a little bit abstracted because of the roundness, I want to make sure that I don't make this D start to read like an O. So what I'm going to do is make sure I emphasize this outer edge, like the outer side of it that makes it different than an O, and really round this part out and then really try to straighten out the other side. And as you can see here, I'm really starting to change the size of these circles a little bit, taper them out. And see, that looks more like a D because we're emphasizing the fact that there's a straight line here. And I think even these sort of overlaps help a little bit, though I think it's a little too aggressive there. And I do see that in this new round, we shifted it down a little bit, so I'm just going to move that back up so it's in line with the other letters. And now we can move on, work on the I. Again, I'm still not worried too much about, the sizing of different things of the cloud puffs yet, because I'm still just like refining to get the composition right. And again, there's no limit on how many variations you can do or how many times you revise things. So I think one thing the taper of the A, I think was a little bit too much here for this to match the other letters. So I'm just going to widen it out. So you don't have to stay like locked into what your bones told you. These can be beefy letters. So this is already looking much better. So if we grab our initial sketch below and look at that and see, we've already gotten so much fluffier. So I still think this part of the D is a little too thin, but we got to be careful because you don't want it to end up looking like an O, but I think we can finesse it a little bit. So I'm going to turn down the opacity again. And at this stage, I'll usually make it bigger, which gives me a little bit more flexibility. All right, so what I'm gonna do here now is just sort of kind of widen this side a little bit. Then maybe we can even make the counter a little bit thinner. I think what we could do is erase that a little bit. That way it's still sort of feeling like a D. Okay. I think the eye is also a little too fat. I also think if we make the top like fluffiest and then just taper it a little bit, it'll look a little bit better. Okay. So I sort of like how we're tapering up a little bit with these shapes, so maybe we could do the same thing with the E. So again, I'm like losing the circles altogether here, but I'm just sort of working on the shape and trying to get it to feel how I want. Okay, I think the A is pretty good, but I'm just kind of moving in a little bit. Maybe we could lower the counter of the A to match the other letters. So I think one thing we could do to make it feel a little puffier is to use the liquefy tool. Under the transform tool, you can choose liquefy at the bottom. So maybe we can try this blow option, make the size really big so that I can do it to like the whole word. Use this warp thing to maybe push the sides in a little bit. Let's come in here and now we can just sort of go for it. I'm drawing blue because this is fluffy, so I'm not going to use black. Let's use the classic inker. Make sure my smoothing's all the way up because we're doing smooth lines. Now I'm just going to come in here and sort of make some half circles and follow this new fluffy, puffed out shape that we made. So again, just varying the size, keeping them fluff-tastical. Pretty fluffy, so you could come in now and add some little more fluffers if you wanted to. Add as many fluffers as you want. So those are fluffy letters. Let's make some drippy letters. So this time I'll start with a font. So I'm just gonna go ahead here. We'll use Yuck. Gonna bring the layer opacity down. Then we'll make a new layer on top of that. And now we're gonna do the same thing where we just sort of add some letter meat, but I guess this time it'll be letter slime. So when I'm doing this kind of lettering, I'm just sort of like making an undulating shape over the whole thing and then just adding drip marks as I go and just sort of spacing them out a little bit so they're not too repetitive, and then sort of changing the size and length. So sometimes it's a little drip and sometimes it's like a longer one like this. Another thing I like to do is kind of let the letters bump into each other when I'm doing some drippy type like this. Script usually works well for this kind of thing just because it's sort of like slime, and when they're connected, I think it sort of makes it look extra gross. So it's this like undulating line and then mixing in sort of drips coming off every now and then. But I'm just using the underlying letter shape to guide me. So it's a really nice way to sort of play around with shapes and experiment with your lettering while having this sort of like grounding to make sure you don't get too lost and like lose the letter forms themselves. So now we can use this as like a new starting point. So I'm gonna bring down the transparency and try to think of ways I can make this a little bit more interesting. So I'm not in love with the Y here in this drippy format. And when I was talking about script before, I thought that would be a nice way to tie this all together. So I'm thinking of making this Y a little bit more scripty. So I'm just sort of using the shape that we have still. And then I'm thinking I might loop it like under, like this. And then just sort of use what's here, but make it into like a script. So I'm like making a new sort of skeleton situation here. So now I'll bring down the transparency on this. So now we've got sort of like two things that we're using for reference. So I'm paying attention to where I had like drips and stuff before, and then just seeing if I can add some new things to it. You'll notice here I like made it thin as it was starting out, just to sort of kind of pull it together. What was I just saying? Pull it together? No, I did that because it's like the starting point. So it's like, the slime is like pulled thin at the ends. Sometimes I think I'm just saying things that I don't even know what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna pull this out a little bit because I'm noticing it's getting a little tight here. And again, this is still the sketch point of this, so I'm sort of problem solving as I go. And then this can sort of like get thinned out, like I said before, the other thing. So this is definitely looking much cooler. So let's compare where we were. Let's see how far we've come. So like this was fine, but we just did a little bit more and it got us here. So let's keep going. So this is the thing, like when you're working digitally like this, well, I guess you could do it if you had a lot of tracing paper. You can just keep refining and making it better and better. Like that, you don't need to start out with something that's just great, because that's what revisions are for. So I got this turned down, I got a new layer. Now I'm gonna get a little bit more serious. So when I get more serious, it involves switching to a different brush. I'm gonna use Too Smooth to Be Forgotten by Kyle Webster, because it's a super smooth brush, and smooth brushes work well for drippiness. So this brush will work well because it has a good pressure sensitivity, so we can taper it out in the drippy zones like we did with the cloud letters. So I'm gonna make sure my smoothing is all the way up because these are smooth lines and I want it to be smooth. You don't want any harsh angles when you're doing drippy letters because it's drippy. No harsh in the drippy land. So now I'm just like following along what I did, but just smoothing it out a little bit. And as I end a line, I'm like lifting up to taper it, to give it that liquidy, drippy feel. So I am improvising a little bit as I go, but I'm mostly following what I drew in the quick sketch. And again, it's just about changing up things so it doesn't look too repetitive, making the drips a little bit different as you go. And I think for this, I want to have the top part cross over. I think it makes more sense than going behind it. So what I'm going to do now is just do this line first. We could have it not like fully crossover, like it's sort of oozing back into itself. Does that make sense? Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing drips like this is the angle at which they're falling. You want to make sure that they're all going down. And for me, I rotate my canvas a lot. I like to draw on an angle. And you have to be careful because you could start doing your drips like this, but then when you put it back to normal, the drips are going the wrong way. So one thing you could do to help with this is come over here to the sidebar and turn on a grid like this. And you could like lower the opacity so you can barely see it. I think that spacing's a little too big. So this is, almost like you're working on grid paper or something like that, graph paper. What's it called? I don't know. This is helpful. So that way you make sure that your drips are going the right way. So where these letters connect, I want it to be like really thin, just like they're almost about to snap. I want to get rid of this because I don't want these drips to be that close to each other. I feel like that looks a little unnatural, so maybe pull one down here. See, this drip is kind of fat. I made this one a little bit thinner. I also like to sort of follow the lines from the other letters, so it just kind of makes a nice shape in between. Again, this is all very improvised. I haven't drawn really drippy letters in a long time, and I forgot how fun this is. So I think it might be nice here to have this sort of split a little bit. And now we can come in and finish off this wiggly tail. What I'm going to do now is turn off that sketch layer, then come back in here and just sort of add in a few more drips inside the letter so it's not just on the outside. So not a ton of these, but just enough to give it some texture. Maybe some are just kind of like lines like that. And sometimes if I'm doing nasty letters, I'll just put some like spots. I don't know why, I just feel like spots make it grosser. Having a little bit of fun with this, so I think I'm going to continue and do some color for it. So let's make a new layer. Let's grab some slimy green, and then I'm going to turn this to a reference layer, then come down to the fill layer below. Click on that, that way we have our color on a separate layer. What we should do now is I'm going to lock the transparency on this, and I'm going to change my black to just like a darker green. So I'm going to grab that round brush, I'm just going to crank it up to huge and then just paint over it. So I'm going to make a new layer in between and add some sort of shadowy tone here. So I'm going to use the same brush, and I think I'll use this same green, but what I'm going to do is just turn down the opacity a little bit so there's still some separation with the line work. And what I'll do here is just kind of come in and give it some shape by adding in shadows underneath some of these drips and where they overlap. I think it's a little too dark right now, but I'm going to keep it this way just for drawing purposes, and then I'll go in and adjust it after the fact. It's easy to get carried away here, and I might do that, but let's try not to, because I think a little bit goes a long way and you don't want to make it too ridiculous. One thing that you can do that would have made this a little bit easier and cleaner is to set this layer as a clipping mask. So if we just go like that, that way we can not worry about staying within those lines. So now I'll look at it as a whole and see if it's sort of balanced. And maybe decide that we want some more in this area to balance that. Maybe pull some down like that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and bring down the opacity even more. And then what we can do is go and add some highlights to make it look moist.
Gross.
So I like to sort of put highlights on the spots where it's like about to drip. I think we need to go a little bit lighter here. I'm just kind of doing some little lines like that. Just some little goopy highlights. Maybe like where it overlaps. Nice place to do it. Again, you don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to go overboard. All right, I think that is acceptably gross. So those are drippy letters. I hope this inspired you to go make some really cool letters. If you make some stuff, definitely let me know. Make sure you tag me if you post them on social media. If you want to see some other lettering styles, what do you want to learn about? Let me know below. And also, if you want to start lettering, but maybe you're feeling that this is too big of a jump to start, check out this other video where I go over ways that you can get started with lettering without even having to draw your own letters. Doesn't even make sense, does it? But check out this video, because it happens. All right, I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. Good talk.